In one of the cities on this list, the snow falls black. In another one, a man's life expectancy is 42 years. And in a third, the wells have been drilled past 700 meters and they're still going dry. None of these are abandoned ruins. People are living in them right now, today, while you're watching this. 7 cities, each one worse than the last. And the one at number 1 isn't in a war zone. It isn't in a desert, and it isn't far from anywhere important. It's a 2-hour drive from a European capital. Stay until the end, because once you see what's there, you won't think about that part of the world the same way again. We start in a city where the air has weight. Linfen, in Shanxi province, which sits in the middle of China's coal belt. 100 years ago, the area was famous for its gardens. Travel writers actually described it as a kind of garden city. Then, the mining came. The town is surrounded by mountains, and those mountains are riddled with coal pits, thousands of them, some licensed, plenty not. Coal gets dug up day and night, crushed, processed, shipped out, and whatever the operation leaves behind hangs in the valley. The mountains trap it the same way a lid traps steam. A few things you notice immediately if you visit. People don't hang their washing on balconies because by evening it turns gray from soot. Masks were normal here long before the rest of us heard about COVID. Parents pull their kids inside on bad air days, which during winter means most days, and schools occasionally just shut down. The health data behind this is what you'd expect. Some of the highest bronchitis, pneumonia, and lung cancer rates in the country. At one point, the World Bank flagged Linfen as one of the most polluted cities on the planet. Authorities have closed off some of the smaller, illegal mines and forced a few of the dirtier factories out of the urban center, and the numbers have improved a little. But coal still runs the local economy, so the smog hasn't really gone anywhere. Over 4 million people live here. They were born into this air, and most of them will never live anywhere else. Every breath is a small tax on their lungs, paid quietly for decades. Next stop, on the edge of Accra, the capital of Ghana, Agbogbloshi. The locals stopped using the official name a long time ago. They just call it Sodom and Gomorrah, after the burning cities in the Bible, and spend 10 minutes there, and you understand why. Decades ago, this was wetlands with a river running through it. Today, it's one of the biggest dumping grounds for electronic waste in the world. Old fridges, broken laptops, smashed monitors, dead phones, kilometers of cable. A lot of it arrives from Europe and the United States, often labeled as second-hand donations, which is mostly a polite fiction. Around 40,000 people live next to the dump, and many of them work it. The work itself is brutal. Boys and young men take bundles of copper cable, set them on fire, and pick the metal out of the ashes. They burn tires for the steel inside. They burn plastic for whatever's underneath. A day's labor earns somewhere between $4 and $8, and most of them count themselves fortunate to get even that. Then the numbers. Greenpeace tested the soil and found lead concentrations up to 100 times above safe limits, with specific samples hitting 18,000 parts per million against an American safety standard of 400. Among children working the site, around 80% show measurable lead poisoning. Researchers in Europe sampled eggs from chickens raised at Agbogbloshi. The dioxin levels were 220 times the legal European food limit. And remember where this is: 15 minutes from a national capital. While someone in Berlin or London hands their old phone over to a recycling service and feels good about it, a kid named Ya or Kojo is breathing the smoke from that same phone, with bare hands and no mask. Now, the opposite extreme on the spectrum. Not chemical poison, cold. Oymyakon, in the Russian Republic of Sakha, holds the official title of the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. The lowest temperature ever recorded here was -71.2 Celsius, roughly -96 Fahrenheit, and some local sources claim even lower unofficial readings. At -60, ordinary human existence stops working the way you understand it. Glasses freeze to your face within seconds, eyelashes ice over, and if you flick a cup of hot tea into the air, it crystallizes before it lands. Engines that get switched off outside often refuse to restart, so people leave their cars idling for hours, sometimes overnight. January averages around -50. Local schools stay open until it drops below -52, and they only close once it crosses -55. Children walk to class in weather that would put most of us in hospital inside half an hour. There's a detail I came across in a Russian documentary that stuck with me. Funerals here, in winter, are an engineering problem. The ground is frozen solid hundreds of meters down, so to dig a grave, men light a bonfire on the surface, wait an hour, scrape away a few centimeters of thawed earth, then light another fire. A single grave can take 3 or 4 days of work. Most houses still rely on outhouses because indoor plumbing tends to crack from the cold. Vegetables don't grow, so the diet runs on horse, reindeer, frozen river fish, and bread. Then comes summer. July temperatures can climb past 30 Celsius, which means the annual temperature swing in Oymyakon is over 100 degrees. No other settled human community on Earth deals with that range. The people who live here were born into it, and somehow keep going. From the deepest cold to a place that suffocates you. La Rinconada sits high in the Peruvian Andes at 5,100 meters above sea level. It's the highest permanent human settlement on the planet, and the air contains roughly half the oxygen you get at sea level. Newcomers spend the first few weeks throwing up, unable to sleep, hammered by headaches. Chronic mountain sickness is the baseline. Your blood thickens, your heart works harder than it was built to, and tourists routinely faint on the streets. Despite all of this, somewhere between 30 and 50,000 people live up there permanently. The reason is sitting inside the glacier above the town: gold. When global gold prices took off in the early 2000s, La Rinconada turned into a 21st century gold rush, complete with everything that label suggests. The labor system is something almost out of the 19th century. It's called cachoreo. A miner works 30 days for nothing. On the 31st day, he's allowed to keep whatever ore he can drag out in a single shift, and that's his pay for the whole month. Sometimes a man works the full 30 days, gets his shot at the rock face, and walks out with worthless stone. His family eats whatever they have left. The town itself has no sewage system, no running water. Rubbish piles up in the streets and freezes there until the thaw. To pull the gold out of the ore, miners mix it with liquid mercury, often bare-handed, and the runoff drains into the same meltwater they later drink and cook with. Peruvian police presence in La Rinconada is essentially non-existent. Peruvians call it La Ciudad Sin Ley, the city without law. Stabbings over a single gram of gold. Prostitution, including underage girls trafficked in from the lowlands. Heavy drinking universal. The average lifespan of a miner here works out to somewhere between 35 and 40 years, between the silicosis, the mercury, the cave-ins, and the knife fights. Forbes once called Norilsk the most depressing city on Earth, and having read about it, I'd find it hard to argue. The city sits above the Arctic Circle, holds about 170,000 people, and is not connected to the rest of Russia by any road. There isn't one, not a single highway. You arrive by plane, or in summer, by ship along a sea route that's frozen most of the year. When residents travel anywhere else in the country, they say they're going to the mainland, the way islanders talk. The city was built in 1935 by Gulag prisoners. Around 500,000 of them passed through over the following 2 decades, mining nickel in temperatures of -50, and 18,000 died on site. The modern apartment blocks of Norilsk are sitting on top of a mass grave, in a very literal sense. Now the air, Norilsk Nickel is the world's biggest producer of palladium and refined nickel, and the plant pumps around 2 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere every year. That's more than France emits as an entire country. Roughly 2,000 tons of nickel and copper dust settle onto the city's snow annually, which is why the snow here is black, not gray from soot, actually black. In 2016, the Daldikhan River turned blood red overnight after a leak from the plant. In 2020, a fuel tank collapsed and dumped 21,000 tons of diesel into another river, and that river is still discolored. NASA satellite imagery shows dead forest in a roughly 60-kilometer radius around the city. Locals call it the dead zone. The human cost lines up with all of this. Average life expectancy in Norilsk runs about 10 years short of the Russian average, and for factory workers, it's around 59. Lung cancer rates are up to 2.5 times the national figure, and winter suicide rates climb above the country average too. On top of all this, the polar night runs about 45 days. The sun doesn't rise for a month and a half, and, as a final dark joke, climate change has been pushing hungry polar bears off the melting ice and into the city itself, raiding the bins. I want to slow down for this one, because what's happening in Sana'a isn't a curiosity. It's an ongoing catastrophe for millions of people who never chose any of it. Sana'a is the capital of Yemen, and Yemen has been at war since 2014. The United Nations describes it plainly as the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet today. The city has been bombed and blockaded for more than a decade, and the international airport closed to civilian flights in 2016. That sounds like a logistical detail until you think about what it means for someone with cancer or a child with a treatable heart defect. Yemen's own Ministry of Health reported that by 2020, around 32,000 civilians had died simply waiting for permission to fly abroad for medical care. Then the food situation. Roughly 17 million Yemenis are in acute food insecurity. Save the Children estimated that by 2018, 85,000 children under the age of 5 had already died of starvation across the country. 85,000 small children. The numbers are so large they start to feel abstract, which is part of how a crisis this size keeps going. Sana'a was also the center of the largest cholera outbreak in modern history, with over 1 million suspected cases. In a national capital, in our century, people are dying of a disease the rest of us read about in textbooks about Victorian London. And the reason is the same as it was in 1854. There's no clean water. There's a longer story underneath the war, too. Sana'a is on track to become the first capital city in the world to physically run out of water. Its aquifers are being drained close to 10 times faster than rainfall refills them, and wells in the basin have been drilled down past 700 meters and they're still going dry. Most people now buy water from private trucks at prices the poor can't afford. Children in some neighborhoods walk kilometers for a single bucket. This isn't a story from a history book. It's happening right now, while you watch this video. And we end with a place where the numbers stop feeling real. Dzerzhinsk. About 250 miles east of Moscow, a 2-hour drive from a nuclear superpower's capital in 2026. The headline statistic? According to the Blacksmith Institute and the Guinness Book of World Records, average male life expectancy in Dzerzhinsk has been recorded at 42 years, and for women, 47. That is lower than Somalia, lower than Afghanistan, 2 hours from Moscow. Starting in 1941, Dzerzhinsk was turned into the Soviet Union's main chemical weapons facility. The plants here produced mustard gas, lewisite, phosgene, then later sarin, and later still VX nerve agent. Some of the deadliest substances ever invented by humans were being manufactured in this town, on a daily industrial schedule for around 50 years. Over that period, roughly 300,000 tons of chemical waste were never transported away. They were simply buried in the ground or dumped into nearby water. On the outskirts of the city, there's a 100-acre lake of toxic sludge, locally nicknamed the White Sea. It isn't a sea. It's a contaminated reservoir saturated to the point that the surface looks bleached. Next to it sits a smaller pit known as the Black Hole, where the waste is even more concentrated. Birds don't land on it. In some parts of the water supply, phenol concentrations have been measured at 17 million times the safe limit. 17 million. In 2003, the death rate in Dzerzhinsk exceeded the birth rate by 260%. For every baby born, almost 4 people died. Walk through the city cemetery and you'll find rows of graves of people who never made it to 40. Kidney failure, lung cancer, tumors in children. And the part that's hardest to digest, about a quarter of the city's residents still go to work at those same chemical plants, because there's nothing else to do here. The Russian government has been promising to clean up the White Sea for over 20 years. Money gets allocated, money disappears. The White Sea is still there. Chernobyl was evacuated and sealed off. Dzerzhinsk wasn't. It opens at 9 in the morning and clocks out at 6 in the evening, every working day. And that's why it's number 1.